My guest today is painter and instructor David Shevlino. A master in the application of loose and economic brushwork, David paints with bold spontaneity and movement and captures the very essence of his subjects. This simplification looks effortless, but it comes from many years of practice and a strong understanding of fundamentals and anatomy. His work often playfully crosses the line between representation and abstraction. You're first greeted with luscious, painterly textures. Then your mind puts these simple forms together and a figure or a still life appears with clarity. When I look at David's work, I can't help but want to run and grab a paintbrush. And I'm so excited to share his work with all of you. So David, thank you and welcome to the stream. And it's really great
Thanks
to
for
meet you.
having me.
No, it's great.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in my studio in North Carolina in the US. There's a little peek at what the studio looks like.
Awesome. I'm curious how this more painterly style developed. Was there a particular breakthrough moment that you can remember?
I'll start from the beginning, or I tell you a little bit about my background. I had a very traditional classical training. I went to art school when I was about 17 years old. And when I entered art school, I was already doing a lot of drawing, was very interested in the old masters. So by the time I got to the Pennsylvania Academy, which is in Philadelphia, I already had a fairly good idea of what I wanted to do, which was study traditional classical drawing. So I spent a lot of time drawing, worked a lot from casts. Yeah, very, very solid foundation. And I would say I was out of school about 10 to 12 years, and I had this sort of a nagging feeling that I wanted to explore something else, that I had gotten to a point where I could do certain things and I was proficient at certain things, but I wanted to take it to another place. I wasn't sure of what form that would take. I didn't know what that would look like. It was as I eventually took the plunge and started to do some experimenting, and that got the ball rolling. Well, skip a few decades and here I am now.
Did you just want to break out from kind of what you were being taught and that kind of thing? You wanted to have a bit more expression?
By the time I was thinking this or feeling this way, I felt as though I was only scratching the surface and that there was something, I wanted to do something more personal. And as I said, I didn't know what form that would take. I can remember just getting some very large panels and some large brushes. I just started experimenting. And at first, I made just a huge mess, and I was very insecure about what I was doing because I was going outside of my comfort zone, which was very new to me. I ruined a lot of canvases. I just made a mess of things, but I kept going. And the more I did it, the more I embraced the idea of experimenting, seeing what could come out of taking some risks and pushing myself into uncomfortable places.
Your brushwork, it's beautiful. Can you tell us what types of brushes you use and how you go about choosing a brush for any given area?
With those experimental paintings that I was talking about, since I was working fairly large, it required me to start using large brushes. It was then that I started to use a brush that was, maybe this wide, and that has carried over into the work that I'm doing now.
Yeah, no, I can't stand it when it's like this. It needs to be.
Well, it's a very different way of painting. It's a very different way of applying paint. I think I've gotten to the point now where I don't really feel, I do use small brushes occasionally for certain things,
Sure.
but a lot of the students when I'm teaching, often they'll say, I would have never thought that you would use a brush that size for this particular passage or something. But then like I said, I've gotten accustomed to it, and I can use the corner of a brush sometimes if I want a small area. I think I just get a little bit nervous if I'm using a small brush. I'm afraid that it's going to just kind of suck me in, and then I start to noodle around too much. So
You start so broad and so almost two tones on a figure or something like that, and
right.
values, sorry, and I love that really stepped back approach. The way you make marks is very deliberate and you can be quite strong and have like a spring as you're applying your paint
Uh-huh.
strokes. Do you think about that? Do you think about the speed of that or the application when painting?
I don't know that I consciously think of it. I think that's become part of my working method. Again, going back to the way I was trained, that all goes back to having a good foundation in drawing and just the sheer practice and experience of having, painted for years and years. I mean, eventually you become more confident about what you're doing and where a stroke of paint or a little dab of paint goes on a good day, that is.
Your edges, soft edges seem to play an important part in your paintings, and
Right.
you can capture so much with so few brush strokes. Is that also, subconscious, or are you thinking, that's how I'm making a soft edge here?
Well, I think that's probably a little bit more conscious.
Yeah.
Economizing and getting more bang for every brush stroke. I think it goes hand in hand with with the evolution of my work. I think if you're going to be more looser and quasi abstract, then it's essential to be able to really understand what you're looking at and be able to break it down, to simplify it, to economize. And so the two things they go together. But I think I am very conscious about when I'm painting about what edge do I want.
You kind of really understanding the form, simplifying core shadow, reflected light, and it maybe even accentuating the real basics there with them large brushes. And
See, again, having a traditional training and really understanding drawing and form and how you create form, or the illusion of three dimensions and volume, is really very important. Well, in any kind of painting, but especially so if you're going to be exaggerating and inventing.
and even more so here perhaps because you've got less room to go back and tinker. You have to be sure.
Right, because again, you're breaking things down and simplifying them. So that means you're filtering out that's what's going through my mind. What has to be there? What doesn't have to be there? And really understanding form and how you put that together is essential. In other words, in order to deconstruct, you have to be able to first construct something, and then you can understand how you take it apart.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So having, again, and with the figure, of course, having some knowledge of anatomy is very helpful. So that too is something that comes into play. But I can take the same ideas or concept which I apply to working from the figure to nearly any form. It could be an apple, a still life, or a tree trunk, or something like that. But the same concepts.
The anatomy of any form that you can. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
One of your most recent paintings, or still a work in progress, I'm not sure, is the Sumo Wrestlers. We got to see a little preview of it on your social, on Instagram.
Oh, right, that one, right.
But what are you looking for there? Is it an energy in all of your paintings? Is it an energy? Is it a dynamism? And how do you know when you're finished with one of these paintings?
Well, in that case, in the case of the sumo wrestlers, yes, specifically, that particular subject is about a sense of movement and energy. And I think that subject, or those figures, the way they're sort of interlocked, and these two massive, the way I look at it is like these two massive forces trying to overcome one another, which is well, we won't go into the metaphors of what all that means, but it's an attractive subject to me in a narrative, as far as a narrative. But visually, it also, I think it lends itself very well to a spontaneous paint application and creating a sense of movement and great energy, and abstracting those forms as well. Like the one you were referring to, the one I think I have it posted on my Instagram account. That's gotten fairly somewhat abstract in places, and then it's a little bit more, descriptive or conventionally descriptive in other places.
Do you find that you look for abstraction, interesting marks on a smaller scale as well? Like, almost as if you could cut your painting up into small chunks, and each chunk is actually quite interesting by itself without the subject. Do you look for that abstraction?
Yeah, I think I do. I mean, there is the whole, the entirety of the painting. But of course, then sometimes I can have a lot of fun with this little section over here. I like that passage over there. I guess the challenge is to get, the whole thing working, trying to put together some elaborate composition like a symphony or something like that. You can have all of these different sections, but overall, the whole thing needs to all flow together and hopefully make sense, as one.
So, David, as you know, you're an inspiration to me and to many others. I'm curious,
Well, that's nice to hear.
where do you get your own inspiration from? Where does that?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. Well, I go through ups and downs, and sometimes I can be inspired by certain subjects or certain things that I see. And of course, there are periods where I'm kind of scratching my head and wondering, what am I going to do today to keep myself from getting bored? But I mean, I try to have several things going at the same time so that I don't have all of my eggs in one basket. I've learned that it's better for me personally, given my personality, to have several things going at one time. And a part of that, I think, is just experimenting. I often will experiment with things, not all of the time. Sometimes I'm just doing something a little bit more straightforward, more conventional. But then other times I'm trying to do something more ambitious and push myself and to experiment with something and to see something start to unfold in front of me, which is actually can be very nerve-wracking. I find that kind of painting really takes a lot of energy.
Are there any rituals or routines that you go through when you start a painting?
I guess the closest thing to a routine or a ritual would be the fact that I like to paint over some existing paint. And so that usually means either painting over old paintings or painting over something that has some ground color or something going on. I have not painted on a blank white canvas in a very long time, and I not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that I find it more psychologically inviting and less daunting if I can see some underpainting or something already on a surface. And I love painting into old paintings because I can take away paint and expose. Because even though I have an idea in my head about where the painting will go or what I want to happen, and basically how I can achieve that, it's not, I wouldn't say that's carved in stone. There's still this element of
Is it almost the painting speaking back to you, like in a kind of feedback where that goal, you're not going to just plow through and make that goal come true.
Yes.
But you're oh, that's nice there, you know. Oh,
Right. I'm looking for those things, and I want to see that. So it's not just, well, I'm going from step A to step B, then to step C.
hmm,
It's not quite it's not quite as
yeah.
linear and logical approach with me, which is another big difference in the way that I work now, and as opposed to the way I was working many years ago. And sometimes I do still paint that way. I did a painting last month of a skull in the studio, and I was very methodical about the way I built it up. And I realized that in some ways it's kind of soothing for me to paint that way, because it's a lot more, it's a much more of a straight line. Like I know, okay, I'm going to start here, then I'm going to go to this, and then the next step, and I know where this is going to end up. But
Having a process could be comforting, but perhaps limiting.
right,
Yeah.
I can't paint that way most of the time, but I like to incorporate that and play around with the process. So that's why I say it's not a straight line. It's not very linear.
In this online class, we're going to have a go at some exercises in economic brushwork inspired by your work. Do you have any tips for our viewers for these challenges?
Use some large brushes. Try to avoid try to avoid these little guys. Right. I'm not even sure why I have that there. Yes, large brushes. And the other thing, I tell my students this, I think it's a good idea to, as an exercise, practice on some small canvases or panels, uh, preferably something that is not too expensive or something that you don't care about. You maybe paint over something else so that you're not looking at it as being precious. And give yourself a time limit, maybe 45 minutes, and just try to tell yourself, or psychologically, you give yourself permission to just let loose with some large brushes, and try to stop after a certain amount of time. Like that's what the time limit is for, so that you don't overwork. Because this is, I think, what I see not only in myself, but what I've seen in students teaching workshops. We start off with these great intentions, and everything's going very, everything looks great in the first 15 to 30 minutes. And then we start to overwork and to noodle around and to play around with the paint. And before you know it, you're overworking something, and everything that you had it initially, or your initial intention of starting with something spontaneous, is all it's kind of all gone away. So that's why I say just start with some small things and give yourself a time limit, and try to, it's going to feel uncomfortable using a larger brush if you're accustomed to using smaller ones, but just try to let it go and get out of your own way, which I find is often a big hurdle. People have a lot of, especially people who are accustomed to, painting with in a tighter style with smaller brushes, it's very difficult to get away from that.
Yeah, it can be a big leap to do that.
It is. Yeah, and it didn't happen overnight for me. It can take some time.
David, I know you've got some fantastic video lessons. Where can people find them?
You can go to my website, davidshevlino.com. I have a number of instructional videos which are in digital form, so that you can just download them directly.
Also, if you're not already, go and follow David on Instagram and YouTube. And anywhere else, David?
Facebook. Well, yeah, that's pretty much, you've
I'll put the
all
links in the description. You also do tutorials all over the world, and you're coming to the UK in October, is that right?
I will be coming to teach an actual class in the flesh in October. So I'll be coming to Raw Umber Studios, and we're going to work from the figure and also still life. I will be teaching in London at London Fine Art Studios which is in Battersea, which is that's a terrific venue. I taught there last year, and that is later in October.
David, something we ask all our guests is, what is your favorite art book? Do you have any favorites?
Well, I would say what comes to mind when you ask about art books is when I first began painting as a young teenager. This was long before the internet, so I had a lot of art books, and I love the old masters. So, and to this day, one of my favorite painters is Rembrandt. So I still have, I think, the first book about Rembrandt. I still have that book, and it's one of my favorites. Any books, picture books about specific artists that I really like, I guess that's what I would consider, my favorite art books.
Finally, is there anything else you'd like to say to our audience?
Well, if you can make it to one of the workshops or the demo, that'd be great. And if you want to embark on this journey from being a tight, very traditional painter to becoming more loose and economical, then just get those big brushes and let her rip. And
brilliant.
Yeah, nothing to fear, nothing to fear but fear itself.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me.
That's right. It's time